We are live, everybody. Let's just give ourselves a minute to see where everybody's coming in from. Alrighty. Welcome to the live stream, everybody. This is Cameron Bashaw. For those of you that don't know me, I run Neologic Studios, which is a mastering service online. But I'm also a coach and mentor for artists through the Music Producers Alliance. And that's probably the logo you're seeing down in the bottom corner below me. Music Producers Alliance is a cool platform for artists and producers of all sorts of backgrounds to basically develop their career and grow, basically. And that's a big, huge part of what I do through the MPA is participate in producer roundtables, which is a cool twice a week event where we have live remote hangouts through either Zoom or Google Hangouts or some sort of online apparatus. And we also use an Audio Movers, which is a lossless audio streaming app, so we can share audio that sounds at least CD quality, which is huge because a lot of those streaming apps, they're the like Zoom apps and stuff like that, they compress audio in nasty ways, and they also do it losslessly, and it just sounds terrible. So it's hard for us to really gauge, something for like actual critiquing purposes. We need to be able to hear things in a lossless format, as close to the true source as possible. So apps like these definitely make it possible. But that's where we come in, and we give each other critiques, feedbacks, great advice. The producers are all able to contribute to the community as a whole. So that's the roundtable here. Go to MPA or musicproducersalliance.com and you can check out register to attend for a roundtable. You can upload your mix or anything that you want critique on. Do it ahead of time before you arrive. That way we have those files prepared and ready to critique. This is hosted by Adam Reifstek, who owns Technophonic. And Technophonic is a label, and they also offer mastering services. So this is actually something, if you want your tracks mastered, I might be touching them if you submit them through here. But the other thing that Music Producers Alliance does is, since they're partnered with Technophonic, any member of the Music Producers Alliance Pro membership will actually get discounted services off of mentorship, coaching from somebody like me. We have 10 other mentors in the group as well. We have Grammy-winning music producers and recording engineers like Zach Allen. There's Adam himself, myself. Tons of people in all sorts of backgrounds and different skill sets. So whatever you're looking for help on, whether it's music licensing or DJing or learning how to set up a live setup, live studio, anything like that, recording purposes, everybody's got different skill sets that our expertise lies in. And that's definitely something you're going to want to leverage because they're going to be able to answer your questions based on experience and knowledge that they've gained from years and years and years of, honing their craft. So mastering services, that's what I focus on. So today I'm going to be covering a song by John Henry. It's actually kind of like a jazz R&B. This guy's a master of a lot of different genres, actually. So I was pretty privileged to get a chance to listen to and touch this track called Modification. I love the track title there, buddy. The big thing here is he's doing kind of like this jazz R&B or new R&B type stuff. There's a bit of like some EDM elements in there, but it's really just a chill, vibey track. So today I need to go in and kind of revise my mastering chain, troubleshoot some issues, because we noticed, especially him, he picked up on some distortion in the Rhodes tracks that we can't tell if it's happening in the mix or in the master. So I'm going to go through and troubleshoot my chain, which you can see open right here, and just try to figure out where that's happening, because I didn't notice it until after he put it out. I thought it was an intent in the track, and so that's why it passed me, unfortunately. I should have reached out to him and asked for clarification, like, hey, were you intending for distortion to show up that way in there? Now, to me, it doesn't sound bad. I'm used to hearing a lot of EDM tracks, and distorted things like this, it's very subtle. It doesn't sound unpleasant. But to somebody who wants a clean mix and a clean master, it definitely sticks out like a sore thumb. So 1 second, I see somebody's trying to join. Head to the Twitch link. So if you guys are following me on Twitch, that's probably the best way to interact with me. If you have questions on mastering, ask me questions through the Twitch chat, and I will try to respond to them as quickly as possible. But if you're following me from Facebook and my posts anywhere in like the Music Producers Alliance group, leave comments there. If you're not able to join on Twitch, and leave me notes in the chat, I'll try to get to them as quickly as I can, but there are no promises there because I'm trying to manage all through one device there. Sorry, folks. So let me just see where we're at here. And so we got 3 viewers. Hey, how's everybody doing today? Leave me a comment in the chat below on Twitch, please. Let me know who you are so I can say hi to you guys. Without further ado, let's just get started. I want to hear the track, so... All right, so there you have it. That is the track from beginning to end. Now, I wasn't bypassing anything really. I was just kind of showing you what my chain looks like. And Zach Falls, you asked, I already have that whole mastering chain on. So yes, you are listening to that with the mastering chain on. That's a custom, yeah, that's a custom template that I have made, and I've also further modified it for this particular song. So there's a lot of things that I've already changed and tried to either add in or subtracted from my standard template that was specifically addressing things with this song. So the very first thing that I was addressing was trying to bring back some transient headroom, because if you look, there aren't really a whole lot of huge peaks. I mean, the transient headroom that I'm looking for lies somewhere within this range, but compared to the meat of the material is actually sitting closer to like right there. You know, we're looking at, that's about your program level, and there's maybe, I want to say 4 to 5 dB difference between where the RMS level is sitting and the peak or the transient information. And he was looking for more punch. Like he wanted the to quote John, he wanted the drum kit to punch you in the balls every time that kick hit. So it needed a little bit more transient sharpness. And so I was increasing that towards the end of the chain. So you can see it's actually close to the end here. Usually the way that mastering works is you're going to want to put your final limiting stage very last in the chain. So the signal flows like a waterfall from the top to the bottom. And that's the way that these ordering is going to be crucial. So if I go and change the order of certain things, you're going to hear a change in the resulting audio, because usually I tend to rush through these sessions. If I have time, I will go through and gain stage them so that they are all uniform output, so I can easily, they're all gain matched, I mean loudness matched. So if I were to bypass one of them, the input and output levels are still roughly the same. So then you're just hearing the difference from what that plugin or that process is adding to the signal, what it's modulating. Unfortunately, with these sessions, I have to be quick. So I usually don't gain stage a whole lot, so long as it sounds good. So you might have noticed we're clipping on some of these plugins. This isn't really an issue so much as if you're bouncing to a fixed integer format like 16 or 24-bit wave, because you can't hit the container any harder than 0 dB. And in floating point, meaning while we're inside the DAW, there is no ceiling, quote unquote. So you can technically go above, and the math is going to still allow you to have those peaks higher than 0. So that's a huge thing. It's not so much, it's sort of like why people will say, if your track is peaking in the red, is that okay or is that bad? And in digital, as long as you're not recording the output that way, if your master bus isn't peaking in the red, like at +5 or something like that, when you're exporting to a wave, like I mentioned, you're okay. You want to be mindful of that. So, the very first thing that I wanted to add back in was the transient. So I put that on very first. Excuse me. That was one of the very first things that I did, even though you notice it's toward the end of the chain. And right away you can see I've got some automation here. So let me just play the track again, and I want you to pay attention to some of these knobs here. So as soon as it passes these nodes, you're going to see these move. So let me just play that really quick. I just realized they might be hidden a little bit behind my. I got to remember where my webcam view is at. So, that's Audio Assault Transient Shaper. This is actually a Transient Plus. This is a really cool transient modulator plugin. I've been using it for a while now, and it can just be really subtle, but it can also be really aggressive. So I noticed a lot of metal mixes, you might be going, instead of the slow option, you might turn it off and just focus on a sharper transient. Slow is kind of a black box term, so I can't tell you exactly what milliseconds they're allowing you to do that. So it doesn't give you complete control over how to modulate the transient compared to the sustain, but it's pretty cool. And then 2x is definitely getting a sharper, like it's just pushing it a lot further up. So if this goes from 0 to plus 100%, this is basically 0 to 200%. So it's a percentage of the overall level that it's working with. But I love it. It's quick and allows me to focus on what I want to do with the signal. The next thing that I started working on was just massaging through the chain and just kind of, for me, it was focusing on dialing in the gain and output, like just starting to massage this template into place. So I feel like it didn't, usually I have this low roll off on because there are a lot of things going on with certain tracks that I'll receive that just, kill the overhead or kill the headroom in the track because they've just got way too much low end. So I usually just want to hear, I try not to leave this on. I'll try to address it elsewhere in the chain, but this is like just the very first stop. I'll try to just hear what it sounds like with the low pass on to see if cleaning up the low end it's usually the first suggestion that I'll end up making to the artist. Hey, we just need to go in there, either turn down your sub by 6 dB or something like that. And from there, we can massage it a lot further. I will end up with it off a lot of the times, but what I might also do is before that, the reason that I use fab filters, so I have a separate layer of control. It's just easier for me to find. But I love the fact that you can tune in. I'm not sure if are you guys still seeing me? Uh-oh, we're dropping frames. Hopefully everybody is still able to hear me okay. I noticed we probably had a spike in the internet. We dropped quite a bit of frames. Wow. Why are we dropping frames? Anyway, if you guys leave me a comment in the chat, let me know how the stream is working out. Okay, cool. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Zach. Perfect. So, back to this fab filter. It's the very first thing in my chain, and I am just giving myself a quick option to go in and basically mono the low end. Now, anytime you're doing just a straight filter as opposed to a shelf, you're adding way more phasing, because usually what will happen is it's taking the signal and it's inverting itself along that frequency band. And so I'm very cautious about how I use these, but in some cases it just, the benefit outweighs the risk involved with this. But I'm just trying to mono out frequencies below 200 hertz. So you can see right at 200 hertz, all the sides information and below is just getting cut out. Oh, awesome. Thanks, John. Welcome to Twitch, by the way. So, yeah, for me, that very first stage, I find helps clear up a lot of issues that happen downstream, meaning when I'm trying to troubleshoot my mastering chain, the rest of the things that I'm doing, whether that's EQ or dynamics processing, notice I have a lot in here. You don't always need this much. This is just my signature chain that I've been working on for years and years, honing in what works and what doesn't. And I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm not saying that this is like the best chain to go to, but this, for what I do, people seem to like it a lot. So I get good results with it. That's the biggest key there. So a lot of low end information. Low end is such a hard thing to tame for a lot of people, and because it's so hard to hear, there's a lot of inefficiencies. When you start to reach down to 20 hertz, there really is like very, very, very few systems that can accurately reproduce down to 20 hertz. And we're talking like large PA systems for big touring companies. Even they have a hard time. They're not going to want to push down that low or try to accurately reproduce that low, because it takes a lot of energy and it takes a lot of carefulness, because it's very easy to overdrive speakers and things like that, where you can end up blowing them, or even just overdrawing your power limitations for certain systems. I've heard of that happen before for live tours. So a safety spot, probably like 30-40 hertz. Everything else like that, they tend not to pay attention to. Most systems can't accurately reproduce it anyway. So what ends up happening is that signal is still there, even though it's not being reproduced. But what will happen is, even though your converters might be trying to convert down that low, it can end up modulating the signal in a certain way. So we want to tame and control things that are happening down in the low end, so that we have more control over these frequencies, because those frequencies are so powerful. I tend to spend a lot of my time very beginning of the mastering stage to just kind of flow through there and clean up things that might be happening, and just at least eliminate the potential for phasing issues, or just over-ended bass, like it's just too much volume feeding into there. So as I go through my chain, you might see that I am doing a little bit of automation throughout the track, and I've already taken markers throughout the song, like we're figuring out where the verse, roughly the verse, the hooks are, intro and outro, to give me an idea of musically where the song landmarks are, because I might want to automate things along those. Another really cool trick that I do is I will automate sometimes the width of the track. And this is actually, it's something, it's fun to play with, but it's very subtle. I try not to do it like noticeably. So I've done this on past mastering sessions for like Zach Falls. I know you're here. Yeah, I've done this on past tracks of yours where I will automate the stereo width, just in clever ways to kind of help move that stereo field and envelope the listener during parts where I feel like you want that to envelope the listener, and then give that drive to the center channel when it needs to just drive home. Let's go. What I need to do right now is I found a spot while we were playing it back. I want to just double check that we're having distortion in the mix and not the master, or just troubleshoot where it is in my chain. So let me go ahead and play this back. Yep, that was it right there. I don't know if you guys can hear it. I caught it. Just a little tinge of distortion on the Rhodes. So the very first thing I want to do is just kind of eliminate that it's happening somewhere in my mastering chain. So I just want everything bypassed except my limiter so we can hear it at roughly the same loudness. So it's subtle. I think I can barely hear it there. The other thing that's happening is because I'm boosting upper range frequencies a lot, just kind of adding some air to the track, it's probably becoming more noticeable there, which also leads me to believe it could be in one of my EQs. So I'm just going to work through this track backwards through my chain and see where I start to notice some of that distortion coming in. I don't know if you guys caught it, but it definitely seems to be happening when I start to compress the signal a little bit more. So it could be happening because of a multiband process, but let's just analyze it a little closer. So I'm just going to turn on. Yep, there it is. Could be our tape saturation. guys think? That sound a lot better. I definitely noticed it cleared it up a lot. That actually was the tape saturation, but it has something to do with the flux, and the flux has to do with the way that the signal is passing through the tape. They're trying to emulate the way that the magnetic level that it takes to hit the tape. And the more flux that you have, basically you start to hear it crackle and distort. Let me just push that to extremes really quick so you guys can hear that. That sounds a lot better. You notice it just started getting that tape distortion because it was just pushing way too much level into the tape. Now, granted, this is a plugin, not an actual tape machine, but they do a pretty good job of emulating how the signal gets affected by tape. And so that was the flux level. I was definitely that was just a little too hot. And while it sounded pleasing for the rest of the track, something that this is a cool trick for, maybe during mixing, is putting this on a drum bus. If you want to soften transients a little bit, but still give a little bit of bite, a little bit of character to the way that the kick or snare is sounding, this lends itself more to like this jazz style music here. It might not work so well for EDM because you want those snappy transients to cut through the mix all the time. You don't want them to be softened, at least not for a lot of that big festival style music. So that's something to keep in mind. I would probably avoid using a plugin like this to do that to your drums if that's what you're working on. So and let's see, just checking the stream. How's everybody doing today? Glad you're able to join me, Uriel. I don't know what's going on. Maybe it's just an internet thing, because I know some people are saying they're having issues. I might be dropping a little bit, so I apologize if that's what's happening. Luckily, the video is recording, so I will keep the video up. I'll see if I can add that to the Music Producers Alliance group. And anybody who has questions that maybe I didn't get to, I apologize. You guys can ask them on the video itself after we're done live streaming. But yeah, so I feel like I was able to fix that. Let's go ahead and just double check everything is playing through okay. And wow, that's funny. There's no undo buffer, yet our mix is gone. That is so weird. Luckily, all the stuff we did is still there. Oops. Let me just bring back the mix. There we are. Yeah, if anybody has any questions on mastering or what I'm doing, feel free to drop me a question in the chat, and I will answer it. And yeah, to answer Zach, this was a custom template. I called it analog-ish because this is mostly a lot of analog emulation plugins. Like you can see, we have the REQ, the vintage EQ. These are from Waves. C1's fairly analog-ish, but where we start seeing the emulations are like the API 2500, the SSLG, the Waves Kramer tape, the SSL comp, this Kazrog EQ, which I have in tube. Like I have the valves, it's emulating valve tube circuitry, so that way the signal is actually passing through and getting some character, some distortion that way. I really love it. It's kind of like a quick low and high contouring. That's why I put it towards the end there, because I'm doing this for a broad strokes and to get the character out of the valves just a little bit. And then the very last thing in the chain you will see is Isotope. I love Isotope's Maximizer. They have a lot of other great tools, but with my chains, I feel like this is still giving me the best control over certain things. So when it comes to outputting all of the various master files that I output, I know John will attest to, I give you guys at least 3. One for CD quality, one for archival purposes, for you to just keep and be able to utilize for remasters in the future if you need to, or reduplication services, because you can basically take that highest quality 32-bit master and generate all of your other master files from it. Or if you need to modify the signal further, it's still available in floating point, which is good because that preserves a lot of information. If there is any issues with the way that my gain staging is affecting the signal, like for example, when I bounce, I try not to do true peak because I notice that it does treat the character, the transients come across a little bit differently. Like I notice the signal, there's just a difference in the signal quality that way, where I want the peaks to still have their punch, meaning their vector. So if you use a tool like tonal balance here, excuse me, let me just turn this down really quick. So I'll play this back for you guys. So crest factor, usually paying attention in the low frequencies. And I tend to err more towards this side. I like the dynamics, the punchiness, the tightness of the bass when you're focusing on this side. But what I notice is if you're playing a track like this, for example, and it were just all the way paid to the right, what that's saying is it's pretty much bricked. There's nothing but sustained information. There's no transients. And when you have information closer to the left side, you've got more transients in the low end, which is, it can be good. You want that thump to come across in the kick, but you also want that space between the kick and the bass elements. So like your sub track, or for example, the actual bass, all the sub frequencies that it's generating, that's the fundamental frequency. They tend to be played very close to each other. And so there should be a relative level relationship between the two. And this is kind of just giving you a quick overview of what the signal in the low end looks like, the relationship between the peaks and the sustain material. And so I use that as a quick gauge just to see where the track is at. I feel for something like this, that's a good healthy spot to be in. Because you get the perception of the kick, it's cutting through, but you don't really have a whole lot of issues with everything else. So yeah. Cool. Welcome to everybody that's watching. Hopefully the live stream's going easy for you guys. No dropouts. I know some people were complaining they were having issues with playback. I apologize. Okay, so I noticed we definitely lost some signal there. What is going on? I'm going to make sure I save this out as a separate project, just in case I need to go back. Save as. Zach, you just posted, buddy. I'll have to check out your quarantine beat after, man. All right, so now that we're through the troubleshooting, I ended up with another issue that popped up during the session because you noticed all my automation disappeared, the mix disappeared, all my timeline markers disappeared. I'm not sure what happened because there was no undo history, no buffer whatsoever. So I'm just gonna make a safety and, oh, there they are. So those markers are still there. We just lost, oh no, it's all there. What's going on? Duh. Brain fart. Check your timeline, folks. It's okay, it happens to the best of us. So, let's just see how things sound now. So there was that gain loss. That was the overhead that I'm adding all these transients back in, so it's boosting the signal back to where I wanted it. This is roughly about where you're going to see it. And this is pretty good. So let me open up tonal balance control again. So pay attention to, I'm in verse 1. I want to check out hook 2. Notice the difference between these two sections here. So it boosted just a little bit. So just that little bit of sustain difference. Like if I go bounce between these, you can see that sustain knob is moving just a little bit. I'm bringing back some of the sustain signal. Excuse me. Try saying that 7 times fast. Yeah. That little difference kind of just helps push the overall volume of the track, the program level. All of the meat of the track is just getting a little bit more up with the transients now, and it's just kind of helped differentiating between the verse and the hook. It's a subtle difference, but our ears are picking on it, but it just sounds fuller when we get to the hook, and all of a sudden everything just stays fuller there. Somebody says that composer is pretty awesome. He should be famous. If anyone is interested, that guitar solo is actually him playing on the keyboard using an Orange Tree Jazz hollow body. I believe he's referring to Orange Tree samples. It's a sample library for Contact. So that's a pretty amazing, once you get into the patches and play around with the articulations. I realize who this is. Chris Gonzo. What's up, buddy? I am not going to take my shirt off. We'll save that for our swimming pool stream. So yeah, that's the bulk of it. And these are the things that I, as a mastering engineer, are paying attention to, is just these subtle things that I can help emphasize between parts of the song, because a lot of producers are focused on the arrangement and making the arrangement stand out. Sometimes for this style of music fits very well with like production library music. It's very licensable. You're going to find that companies for commercials, documentaries, even YouTube content creators are going to want to license tracks like this to play in the background of their stuff, which means that it's monetizable. But you notice that through an instrumental, there's not a whole lot of things to make it sound like a solo artist is going to stand out. So there's a lot of background information, and the whole track kind of just has this vibe going to it. So I'm doing what I can to just help differentiate between parts of it and enhance the listening experience to keep it interesting. And those subtle things aren't going to be picked up by the average consumer. It's not conscious. It's going to be subconscious. We want to just tap into the subconscious and let them feel the groove, let them feel the differences between those. And I'm helping just move that subconsciously. I could go an extra step further, like I showed you guys earlier. Again, bringing up the center tool. This plays with the stereo width. I can automate this through certain parts of the song too, where throughout the verse and the hook, we kind of move between a more mono-compatible version and a wider stereo image. And just that movement alone will also enhance things like the Rhodes, all of this upper content, the guitar, that will, playing with the width just in the upper, because you notice I have the lows dialed in, the highs dialed in, the punch going to center or sides. This stuff right here is just tuning how things are getting filtered between these two center, what's getting filtered to center and what's getting filtered to sides. And if you think of it, it's basically a mid-side decoder, and you're able to set these filters for the transients, meaning the punch, and the low and highs, what is getting filtered more or less into the center channel and the sides channel. So it's such a cool plugin. I'm able to do so much with it in just one plugin. That's why I love it. You can use other mid-side tools for doing this type of stuff. So like MSED, MSED by Voxengo is another good one. I believe it's free, or they have a free version. but this just allows me to do so much in one plugin. I can do it nice and quick. And then where I focus on my efforts is just automation, just doing subtle movements to help the track breathe and come to life. So let's just do, I need to do some bounces actually. I think it's sounding good. So let's take a look at the energy distribution. So this looks good. This is healthy. And this is why I did that roll off, because I noticed with that FabFilter Pro Q off, look at all this information that's coming back down to the subs. This is below 100 Hertz. All that sides information does not need to be there. So let me push the master back up and I'll let you guys listen to it A/B between the sides info off and the sides info on. Or filtered out, I mean. I don't know about you guys, but I definitely noticed the kick has a clearer transient. It's able to come through a lot clearer when I'm turning that filter back on. So that's huge for me. There are some instances where you might not want to filter out lows like I'm doing here in the sides. And this is more of a mix choice. I would recommend trying to tackle these issues in the mix as much as possible so that you have the clarity. And when I don't have to do it here, that means I'm doing less risk. There's less risky moves that I'm doing, because I mentioned earlier that doing a move like this, where I'm just doing a filter, meaning I'm filtering out everything below 200 Hertz and just the sides channel, that introduces phasing issues, because what it's doing is it's flipping the signal on itself to cancel it out. That's how it's doing it. That's what a typical filter does. And there are different ways that you can treat this to try to accommodate for it, but even those have issues too. So with linear phase, what it's going to do is it's going to pay attention to the filter, the crossover point, and what it's going to do there is basically invert it, but then throw it or time align it so that at that specific frequency, the time that it takes to reproduce that cancels out the issues with phase at that crossover point, meaning now it's linear in phase for that particular frequency, but then everything else below it comes earlier in time. And this is what happens with certain low frequency information. You introduce what's called pre-ring, because that information is showing up early or ahead. So that's one issue with linear phase. So I just tend to leave it there, and I'm very mindful of just trying to do it in a way that you're not really noticing an impact in that frequency range. So across this crossover band, the benefit versus the risk. The benefit was way greater than the risk involved in this frequency band, because one, I got so much energy back and focus in the bottom end for the mid channel, meaning where the kick was sitting. That transient cuts through loud and clear now, as opposed to with this filter off. There's so much sides information competing in the low end that's unique to the left and right channel that we lost. It would smear our transient for the kick, and that's a big no-no. I wanted to try to get that back, so the benefit outweighed the risk on that one. Everything else that I'm doing in the chain is just color, raising the gain level overall, and then gently massaging the dynamics. So if you notice, like, I've got several stages of dynamics. We've got the C1. I love the C1 because it's so gentle, transparent until you break it. If you're pushing it too hard, it will break. You'll notice it right away. Some people have asked me, why do I have an L2? Why do I have a limiter on so early in the chain? And you'll notice there are a few spurious peaks here that just go way above with the rest of the meat of the material. So you notice if we're looking at this section right here, and you can see the blue outline of where I'm just kind of like highlighting, I'm lassoing it, right? There are some peaks that just kind of reach way out in the middle of nowhere. So these are spurious transients. I'm trying to just tame those and make it so that those are within a parameter of workability that I can start massaging and not have those transients trigger over compression or over limiting downstream where I'm really trying to do the lift in the signal. And so this is basically my tamer. He's taming all of those rogue transients that are going way above or a little above where I want them to be. So if we call all of these transients here and anything outside of this blue area, it's going to start ducking. But it's going to do it as quickly, as transparently, and as crisply as possible. Because if you notice, my release time, I have it set to arc, but it's based on a 1 millisecond release. So this is super fast. This is about as fast as you're going to want to go. You can go all the way down to 0.01, which is super fast. That's almost down to the sample level, especially at a 48,000 samples per second track. We're getting close to the sample level for that. And what we want to do is just tame those peaks and make it so they never went over. They just, hey, we're only at this level with the rest of you guys. So that helps me set up all of my other multiband stuff and compression downstream so that these compressors can do the character lift that I want them to do without being overworked on occasion. And then you notice the signal like just ducking, all of a sudden the song gets quiet and it starts to come back because they have a slower release time on certain things. So that's the gist of it. How's everybody doing out there today? Man, I actually had quite a few. Glad to see a bunch of you guys joining in. I appreciate all the comments. Oh, Gonzo, you are the sexy one, my man. So, if anybody has any questions, I am going to take this time to answer your questions while I bounce this stuff. So, I can explain like my workflow, my layout here if you guys want. I mean, the biggest thing for me is this whole session template that I use. I've built over years of just practicing, and I like this particular workflow because I like having the ability to quickly call up reference tracks, and I've taken the time that I can easily just toggle between, as you see here, my preview, which is set up to these, so you notice they're color-coded. So I can easily toggle between those. If I'm listening to a reference track, I only want to hear that track. So I might mute these, but then whatever one I'm referencing, if I like that reference the most, I can easily just A/B toggle between it to hear roughly where I'm at. I want to hear energy distribution. I'm not really caring about the content of the song. I'm just listening for overall energy and vibe, like transients, punch, drive, those kinds of things. Where is everything sitting at in relation to each other? So that's what having this preview bus is for. You notice I've got a quick access to the same copy, the same setup of span over there as on my master bus. And you might be asking, why do I have 3 chains, like analog-ish, chain B, chain C? So one thing I can quickly do if I am working on, actually, yeah, John, will you be able to use that same chain on my other songs for the album so they all have the same? Yes, that is the reason that I do things the way that I do, is everything is quickly recallable. So I can easily save out this chain template, but I can save out this whole project as a template. And this is what I always do, is I have a template made out of this session with the audio removed. Everything's just blank, meaning that we don't have any of this automation anymore. But I do keep in mind what I have done automation-wise so that if another track needs it, I can easily recall it because those lanes, as you'll see here, are already labeled and laid out. So I can just delete the nodes because it may not need the same exact spots for every track. I can either move them around, etc., or just delete them, start over from scratch. So this is the coolest part about why I do this layout this way. But the other thing is maybe this chain for your next song doesn't work quite as well. Like we're just noticing it's got too much pressure and we want more space. And the track is, similar to what you've done here. It's another jazzy R&B one, right? I can easily just go audition another chain that I've made that has a different approach. And I can just mute that one, unmute chain B. And all of these are set up, if you'll see their output, it just says mastering chain send. All three of these are getting routed to, basically it's being sent through a path, and that path is showing up across all of these. So they all have the same input. So mastering chain send stereo, that's where they're receiving input from. And I can easily, so basically I'm getting three-way parallel. I'm basically parallel sending all of the mixes, whatever mix I have unmuted or soloed or whatever, will be fed to all three chains at the same time, and they're just muted. I left that one off, and this is the only one that I've been working with. But let's say, yeah, I wanted to open up a new chain, so I can just go in, insert an FX chain preset. I go to my presets, projects, and maybe there was one from a different project last year that I really liked. Let's go to, let's see. Please don't let me lose the stream. All right, it opened up. I'm just going to say this as VGB. Again, save your work often, folks. So, as you can see here, it just says master chain. And if I extract, there are all those plugins right there. So that's a whole other chain. Let me just audition that for you guys so you can hear the difference between those two. Really? That Valve EQ did not like me. No. Well, unfortunately, that experiment didn't go as planned. Okay. Ouch. Or cakewalk, excuse me, reopens. Yeah, I answered your question there, John. That definitely is something you can do. That's what we tend to do because that makes our job a lot easier. Doesn't necessarily mean that it'll make future mastering sessions go any faster because we're still going to have to massage the chain for the individual needs of the track that you've sent. Because things like volume, overall level might be different. The energy distribution between all the different drum elements, bass elements, those kinds of things, those might be unique to that song. There might be things that you did differently in the mix that I have to address with the mastering chain. So it's a great starting point. It just gets me there. It gets me there faster, where I don't have to build that chain all over from scratch. And there are higher end producers and engineers, for example, mastering engineers. I know like, drawing a blank, Michael Romanowski over at Coast Mastering, world-class engineer. This guy has touched thousands upon thousands of records in his career. He runs out of Berkeley, and I've been to his facility a few times, and it's gorgeous. Like there's a pair, he's got high-end equipment, way higher end than you guys see me here working with. But he's also working with outboard, and when you're working with actual hardware, the sessions tend to be more costly because he just has to take that much more time to recall everything. So that means he also has to take more notes, unfortunately. Whereas when we're working almost completely in the box like I am here, it makes life a lot easier. A lot easier. So, yeah, it definitely has the same feel when you're able to recall everything. You're not like, oh, did I get that within a 1 dB increment on the knob for the hardware unit? When I recall the session, all the exact settings come up exactly the way I left them. There is no questioning if they're properly set up or not. So that opened up the wrong one. Let me open up the one we just saved. And yeah, if anybody has any specific questions on mastering, that's what I'm here for. So feel free to ask me any questions. If you guys have questions on, do I target a specific LUFS or anything like that, feel free to leave them in the comments or the chat, and I will answer them. just go back to V2. I'd like to show you guys it, but I'm afraid it's just going to do the same thing. That Valve EQ plugin seems to be a little bit touchy. Doesn't like me sharing with other plugin chains, apparently. Yeah, let me know if you guys still can hear everything. Just double checking. Hey, all right, we still have signal. Perfect. And there we are. There we go. Okay. Hey, we're back. Perfect. So Zach, you asked, is making everything mono below 200 hertz a pretty hard rule? Sometimes I use stomps to enhance a kick drum. Should that rule apply to those stomps? No, I would not say it's a hard rule. I would say, if anything, be mindful of all the things that you're putting down the low end. So having a tool like Voxengo Span, because I can just play this back again really quick so you can see this. And let's just A/B with that off, and look at all the info that just came back, because I just turned off Pro Q. Having a tool like this, I just turned it on, and look at that, it's going to drop massively. Massively, massively. And again, that info allowed me to clean up the kick. And the kick was, the transient of the kick is specifically what's coming through a lot more now that I have that filter on. So I would just say, yeah, being aware of what you're throwing on down there, if you can tackle this in the mix, that just makes life a whole lot easier. But yeah, I wouldn't say it's a hard rule. Pay attention. So let's say you have like a nice Moog, like Sub Fatty or something like that, where it's just this nice analog outboard synth, beautiful filters. The reason people love those analog synths is because of those filters. They just sound so lush, so warm, so gorgeous. But they also throw out a ton of low-end information, and they might even do that in stereo, meaning there's unique sub information in both the left and the right channel. And that's what gives it that warm, wide, huge feel. You could probably hear this in the Vangelis work that he did, or that Vangelis did on the Blade Runner soundtrack, even the new Blade Runner soundtrack with Hans Zimmer. Just huge, wide, low end. And you don't want to cut that information out. I've done this with another track from a buddy of mine, Lucas Franco, who submitted to me. Yeah, we did probably 7 or 8 tracks together, and he was preparing for a huge EP and a bunch of singles to just start launching his music career with. And he had that nice, fat, low end that he totally loves from like the early 2000s era. Like we're talking like 9 Inch Nails status meets like dancey music. Like it was just, it's got that upbeat funk. It's got a great vibe to it. But the sound of the bass, the sound of the sub was just super wide. And he likes to tuck his subs, the sustain content, below his kick. So his kick, the transient and the fundamental of the kick would always be higher up in the frequency range than his subs. His subs would sit or live below the kick. And when I went to mono compatible that stuff, if I went to mono friendly, all of that sub information, it just left his bass synth, that sub synth, the Moog Sub Fatty, sounding really hollow. It sounded cold. It lost that warmth, it lost that width, and it lost that vibe, that character to it. So I ended up not doing that. You just want to be really mindful in that case that your level, your overall sustain level, is balanced with the rest of the stuff in the mix. So things like your kick in relation to it, there's just a different way that you attack it, because if your kick, your fundamental of your kick is sitting higher up in the frequency range than your sub, your relationship between the energy of those two can differ, which is why tools like this and tonal balance control, so you can easily see the crest factor, are so huge, because that area is really hard to hear. We have a hard time here, especially in headphones. We have a hard time recreating those. So you can't accurately gauge. These tools will only help in aiding you to see, how that signal is coming across. So hopefully that answered your question there. Yeah, just try it and see. I believe Voxengo has a free version of Span, so you can use this tool here for free. You don't have to buy it. They have, this is Spam Plus. I bought it because it's freaking amazing. There's a lot you can do with it routing wise. Like if you want to work in 5.1, 7.1, et cetera, et cetera. I have it in mid-side mode, and that's where I'm getting the underlay in red. So if I play that again, that's the underlay here. So if I switch to sides, I could switch that color there. Pretty cool. But it's just such an easy way to quickly gauge and see what's going on there. Yeah, so thanks everybody for joining in with me on the stream. And if you guys have any other questions, now's the time to ask, because I'm basically just ready to start bouncing this. Let's get this off to John so he can release it. I know you've been waiting for this one to come out, buddy. This one's super, super good. I have just been digging the track the whole time I've been listening to it. You can't help but bob your head to stuff like this. It's just so groovy. Yeah, for one thing that I like to do with all my mastering clients, whether they ask for it or not, I think it's just good to have good practice, bounce several versions. So what I'm going to do, oops, let me just make sure. Archival at 48, 32. So my session rate is at 48,000 hertz. So that's why I bounced at 48. I tried to get the highest quality sample rate that your session is in. So if you're going to bounce your session to send to me and you're working at 96K, then bounce it at 96K. Whatever session rate you're working at, just set that as your sample rate on the bounce. And then what I would prefer is that you've already set your mix. Turn off your master bus processing. Anything that you have on your 2-bus, like if it's just a generic limiter or ozone or anything like that, turn that off and then go to the loudest part of the song and then see where it's peaking at, and then turn down your master bus output until your loudest peak is roughly about -6. That gives me plenty of headroom. That means it's already gain staged for me to do my thing. So that's what John here did roughly. And you can see there were still some peaks that went above it, but for the most part, the meat of the material give me plenty of room to just start dialing in with my chain. Now the reason I'm going to give you guys this suggestion as well, export at 32-bit depth with no dithering, is because that gives me an extra layer of protection or precaution, so that in the case there is some sort of like true peak or intersample peak that happens above 0 dB, it's not going to result in clipping or any sort of distortion on the wave that you output, because 32-bit floating point keeps that ceiling flexible. It moves it a little bit, quote unquote. It's hard to explain really what's going on because of the math involved, but for the most part, imagine at 32-bit, you have the same amount of headroom. You have more headroom than at 24-bit depth, like the dynamic range. There's something like 168 dB of dynamic range there. And then at 24-bit. So 32-bit not only expands that range even further, but then it also allows that floating point math to just shift when it needs to. So the dynamic range will always stay the same, but then if there is a peak that goes over it, it can kind of just move to accommodate that peak, which is really interesting. At least that's how I've heard it explained to me before. So it's really interesting. That's why I suggest also exporting at 32-bit depth and then turning off dither, because at floating point math, you don't need it. Dither is really just going to protect the lowest bit, meaning right next to the noise floor. So it becomes very apparent at 16-bit depth or lower, like old days of like Sega or anything like that, they might be 8-bit. So at 8 bits, you only have so much dynamic range, and you would really notice those steps towards the bottom, meaning like the quietest part of the signal. So the noise floor, imagine if you had silence. Silence was your noise floor, right? And then you had a reverb tail cutting off and it went down to silence. The closer it got to silence, where it's just down to 1 bit or 0, meaning like silence, without dither, it would just break up and you might get just a little crackle. So dither applies a high frequency noise, hopefully just at the very top end, barely perceptible to human ears, and just enough that it would create a more linear response to that tail. So as the tail faded out to nothing, dither noise would allow that frequency variation, the high frequency content, to stay in there enough to overcome those issues where it would just be a 1 or a 0. Is it either on or off for a random amount of samples. So that's pretty cool. Not necessarily for mix downs where in modern music, because we're dealing with stuff that's already pegged really loud. Like we're dealing with signal that's way above the threshold of silence for what we're working with. So I wouldn't be ultra concerned with it. But yeah, if you have the option to dither on your output or your export, just leave it off, especially if you're bouncing 32-bit. Yeah, so thanks for that question, Zach. That was a great one. So I have a question for you. What do you mean by stomps? Are you using stomp boxes or plugins that are... let me just reread your question there. You use stomps to enhance... Oh, so maybe like stomp samples. Layering kicks, basically. Yeah, definitely. Because if there's sides information out there on those stomp sounds... and your kick is very mono compatible, you can use just the top end of those stomps to give the stereo width to it and give it some stereo field. Very interesting play. But yeah, you definitely want to make sure that your sub information is mono compatible. So filtering out that stuff will keep it from competing with your actual kick sample, which is mono compatible, because that phase relationship can cancel those out at that frequency range. Hopefully that answered. Yeah. Nice. Stomp samples. Cool. Okay. So I mentioned I'm outputting multiple versions. So now that we're done with this one here, this is the 32-bit archival master that I just exported. I'm going to go into the dither option, and we are going to bounce at 24-bit depth. And this is where I was talking about dither amount low. It doesn't need a whole lot. I put this low. The dither noise signal is just super low in the mix. Doesn't need to be in there a whole lot. And then noise shaping. So if I go through these options here, you notice that it starts to push down. You know, this curve starts to get really extreme, and then it just goes way up towards 20K. I want that signal to just be way up there, because I don't want stuff that's competing down with the audible range. Between 10 and 15 kilohertz, that tends to be the limits of what human hearing can do. They say we can reach, the human ears can hear from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. But that's just a ballpark. Not everybody can truly hear that. And as we age, we also lose a lot of top-end hearing that we just aren't as sensitive to it anymore. So I'm going to turn that on. Actually, I'm going to turn on and we'll go to 16-bit. And the reason I do a 16-bit 4416 CD quality standard. There we go. And I'm doing this one just because on my next one, I am going to have to go into my output on the maximizer, so back in the main window, and I will set the output, the level, to -2 dB true peak. So for streaming platforms, most of you guys probably won't have to deal with this. For example, John, you're probably just going to use the 4416 one, the CD quality one. You're going to submit that to CD Baby. You don't need the other two because they only accept 4416 CD quality standard. If you guys are dealing with labels, they might want to see all three versions. That way they can pick and choose or cherry pick which one they're going to submit to different platforms, because even labels don't have direct interfaces with Apple Music or Spotify or anything like that, unless they're maybe one of the major three. So like Sony BMG, they might have a direct deal, but they also have the infrastructure in place to be able to handle large catalogs of music at once being distributed to Spotify. And they want control over it. So that's understandable. But for the rest of us plebs, we don't get that option. We have to go through an aggregator, meaning somebody like CD Baby, DistroKid, Amuse, any one of those services. They're going to take what you upload to them, your release, whether that's a single, an album, an EP, or whatever, and they're going to help do all of the metadata and aggregate it, meaning distribute it to all of the outlets. And whatever outlets they cover, everybody has a different, each service is going to have their own list of outlets that they serve. Some of them might serve more that you have to ask permission to serve on. For example, DistroKid will upload to Beatport, which is great for you DJs out there. but you have to ask. You just have to reach out to the support team saying, hey, I'm releasing music that I feel would be great for Beatport. I know most of my market might be on there, so please upload it there. And they'll just respond back saying, perfect, we've added that to your distribution outlets. So from now on, all of your releases will be put to Beatport, which is cool. That's good to know. But you have to ask for it because by default, that's turned off. Yeah. And if you guys are running into labels that maybe ask you for multiple versions, that's why I do this. And it's also just, I think it's courtesy. CD Baby only supports 4416, but other services out there, even Bandcamp, will accept higher quality versions. So like 48 kilohertz, 24-bit, or 4424, as opposed to just 16. 24-bit is becoming a newer standard for a lot of different aggregators. I believe DistroKid, SongTrader, and a lot of those will accept higher quality than 4416. But what they do keep in mind that on their end, based on what the outlet's needs are, if, for example, Spotify only accepts 4416, they're going to do the conversion on their end. So that's why you want to be mindful of there are still some things outside of our control as mastering engineers, and I'm just trying to cover as many broad bases as possible, which is why I give you guys 3 options whenever you submit a master to me. You're going to get those 3 files, and I explain what they do in the follow-up email so that way you guys have it. Just good to know. All right, so we're almost done bouncing that one. I've got one more bounce, and then we're going to call it a day. Does anybody else have any more mastering questions? Because now is the time to ask. And super cool live stream with everybody today. Thanks so much for joining. Zach, John, Uriel, let's see, what else was there? Gonzo. Yeah, buddy. We'll work on that shirt, t-shirt contest there soon. Awesome. So for those of you, if you're not sure, or if you haven't come across me before, I'm part of Music Producers Alliance, and I run a studio called Neologic Studios. Bam, that one's done. Let me just bounce the last one really quick. Oops, didn't mean to close that. So I'm gonna go to 24-bit, and we're gonna turn the ceiling down to 2, and turn True Peak on. So again, this is because if there is a label service that is asking specifically for streaming compatible stuff, I find this to be the healthiest average for most what those streaming services are going to want. Specifically, Spotify asks for a -2 dB True Peak, and then they will analyze that signal or analyze that file for -14 LUFS is just a rough target, but they go based on the loudest 5% of the track. They don't do a weighted or integrated average, meaning they don't look at the whole track to determine that -14 LUFS. They will look at the loudest 5%, and then they will turn it down to -2 dB True Peak, which again, if there are intersample peaks, meaning in between samples, because that curve can be reconstructed in the analog domain, meaning when your digital to analog converters on whatever device you're listening on is converting it to a voltage for a speaker to be driven. If it can be reconstructed above 0 dB, that's going to result in clipping distortion at the converter because it just can't handle it. Doesn't know how to go any louder or more voltage than what's maximum voltage in the analog domain for that digital signal. So that's why you hear this is like a big no-no. And that's why all these services are doing their best to try to mitigate that. They want to avoid that as much as possible so that the listening experience is as true to your signal, your master, as possible. Everybody's just hearing the sound of what you intended them to hear. It's not being impeded by the, lesser quality converters or anything like that with your mobile phone or anything. So that's just the way life is with these streaming services. Sorry to say it. All right, so our very last one, I'm going to do 4424 for streaming. So let's bounce that. So this is my last bounce of the day, folks. And again, if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I run Neologic Studios. You can go to my website if you guys want to check it out. Feel free to submit quotes there. However, if you are a Music Producers Alliance member, a pro member, you will get discounted services off of mastering and coaching, because we have the mentorship program through MPA. So again, it could be me, it could be any of the other 10 mentors that are available for you guys. We do one-on-one coaching sessions. So this is super cool. If you guys have questions, maybe you want to learn how to master your own stuff or mix your own stuff, that's what we're here for. But we even have guys that are great DJs and stuff that have done huge tours and things like that, that you can lean on their expertise with how to set up a live touring, or maybe you have questions on how to DJ or how to get into the gigging scene, build those connections, music licensing, things like, there's just a ton of resources here for you guys to lean on. And these one-on-one coaching sessions, I find, are the best way to start getting actionable plans that you can start working on immediately. And again, as a Music Producers Alliance Pro member, you'll get discounted services off of what the normal coaching sessions are. I believe they're $95 a session. And there's actually a pretty significant discount if you're an MPA Pro member. So definitely keep that in mind. And again, I'm Neologic Studios. I've got a lot of my work up here. So you can go to neologicstudios.com. You can check out my recent work. I also have a portfolio if you guys want to see past things that I've done, because I've done a number of things outside of just mastering. I've done commercial audio posts for film, trailers, commercials, you name it. So there's a lot of stuff there if you guys want to check it out. My other profile, on MPA, if you go to, wrong page, the community, this is another cool feature of Music Producers Alliance, is the direct portal for linking up and just networking with other producers, artists, DJs, and just getting in touch with them, because this is another leverage tool that you guys can have in your network there. So for pro members, if you join the community, not just on Facebook, but you'll have direct access to people here. And this is a great way to do either session sharing or things like that. If you reach out one-on-one, build those relationships. This is just another great tool at your fingertips. I'm on here as Pollux and Caster. If it ever decides to load. Might be my slow internet. Maybe just look for my name. What do you mean you can't find me? I have a profile. Yep, see, Pollux Caster. So this is me and my buddy Steven Hastings. We do kind of like hybrid music duo, a lot of hip hop and electronic stuff. So if you guys are interested in maybe checking out some of my tracks, I do have some stuff that we're sitting on that maybe can use some remixing. I'd love to start sharing some tracks and doing some collab work. Feel free to hit me up. And that is it, folks. Thank you so much for tuning in today. If you guys have any other questions, feel free to reach out to me directly through MPA in the music group, or even just hit up the Music Producers Alliance Facebook page and drop your questions there. We're always willing to help out. And don't forget about the roundtables that are happening twice a week on Wednesdays and Sundays. So no matter where you are in the world, we have producers that can just all gather, hang out, and give each other critiques and advice. This is definitely one of the fastest ways that I've been able to network with a ton of other producers and just help them out. And that's actually where I've been meeting some other producers that are sending me work to master right now. So, yeah, hit us up. And until next time, folks, have a great day. Later, guys.